So much reading to do for university. Like in 2 weeks, I think I've had to read 3 books. My eyes are so tired. I don't know what to do anymore.
Why don't you just try listening on Audible?
What is Audible?
It's a site where you can listen to like thousands of books, like from Shakespeare to Milton to, the latest fantasy novels.
Oh, Audible! I do love Audible, actually.
Oh, so you know Audible.
Yeah. They're our favorite sponsors. Yeah. You should try Audible, dear listeners.
Yeah, today's podcast is actually brought to you by Audible. And if you use our code, which is Shakespeare, at www.audibletrial.com/Shakespeare, you can actually get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial. There are over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, your Android, Kindle, or MP3 player.
And, what's your favorite book that you've listened to recently? I've listened, because I know you're a big Harry Potter fan.
Yeah.
And so you made me listen to the Harry Potter books. So I've listened to the first one. I'm listening to the second one right now. What's the guy's name narrating?
Oh, Jim Dale. Oh my
Jim
God,
Dale
I'm the biggest
fantastic.
Jim Dale fan. I've heard Stephen Fry's good, but I grew up listening to Jim Dale. Like, some sections of the books I actually have memorized because they would be the place I would start every night, like from like elementary school through high school. So I can like rattle off sections of like the sixth Harry Potter book at will.
That's so cool.
I thought you were about to say nerdy, so I'm glad
That's
you
so
said.
nerdy too.
And pathetic, but
Yeah,
you
and
know.
pathetic. You have so
Well,
much time on your hands.
Well, it was like as I would go to
Anyway,
bed.
you use Audible, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
The versions of Harry Potter, and they're narrated by Jim Dale.
Jim
great.
Dale, yeah. And he does like different voices for every single character, which I love.
What have you read recently? The Call Me By Your Name book, I think?
Yes, I read it by Andre Osserman, and it's actually narrated by Armie Hammer, who plays Oliver in the film, which was confusing at first because he's narrating from Elio's point of view. But you get used to it, and he does a fantastic job. Like, I saw why they picked him to do the audio. Because he just really, like, there are lots of weird, complicated sentences, and, like, there's a couple different languages in the mix, and it just works perfectly.
Is it in French, too? Is there French and Italian in there, too?
There's a little bit spoken, but most of it's in English.
Oh, awesome.
But I like to hear, like, he pronounces everything well. I'm sure he had direction on it, but...
He has a low voice.
He does have a low voice, which is, like, very soothing to listen to, like, on the subway. You don't want someone chirping away at you, you know?
Yeah. The movie was fantastic, if you haven't seen it.
If you haven't seen it, you need to watch it. Timothy
Well,
Chalamet should have won Best Actor.
Yeah. But you should read the book first, and you should use Audible for that.
You should read the book. Yeah, listen to Armie Hammer narrate it. It's really good.
Yeah. So, what can they do to download their free audiobook?
So if you go to www.audibletrial.com/Shakespeare, you'll get your free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial. And even if you choose to discontinue after the first 30 days, you get to keep the book. And they have like thousands of titles to choose from for iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. You can download them onto your computer, and like if you want to switch it to like a different speed of narration, you can speed it up, slow it down. It's like totally customizable, which is great.
So yeah, go listen to your audiobook now.
And the great thing is, like, you can have competitions with your friends over who can finish a book first, which I like to do.
Yeah, she does that with her boyfriend.
Yeah, currently I'm reading Senlin Ascends while I'm listening to it, and he's listening to Harry Potter. But I'm winning by like 3 hours, so it's fine.
Oh well, you can go to audibletrial.com/Shakespeare to get your free audiobook and 30-day free trial. Thank you so much to Audible for sponsoring this podcast again.
Thank you, Audible.
We love you. Okay. So we have a Westworld Part 2 podcast, I believe, today.
We do.
So last time we left off on Westworld talking about Romeo and Juliet, I believe, and the fact that the showrunner explicit that they use Shakespeare in the show.
Right, and we like that they aren't trying to exactly get away with it. They're actually saying, we really enjoy drawing on these sources.
So on this part 2, I believe we talk about Prospero, we talk about The Tempest, we talk about Laertes from Hamlet.
Yes, Lee and Laertes.
We talk about Logan too. I think the other podcast was very Romeo and Juliet. Now we get to explore the other plays from Shakespeare that are Westworld is taking from.
The whole wide world of Shakespeare.
And we also look at other works of literature that are taken for Westworld.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty interesting podcast. All right, let's get this party started.
Let's get the show on the road.
Welcome to How to Get Away with Shakespeare, episode 5. You're listening to How to Get Away with Shakespeare with Jane Fox and Gabriel Vega. Starting now. But she said, we take a lot from Shakespeare, and we're big fans of Shakespeare. He would be an amazing showrunner, and it's clearly there. They're clearly explicit about that. They're not, we're just getting away with Shakespeare, and nobody's going to catch us.
No, I mean, the idea of people having secret identities, too, especially in the
disguise, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, when someone turns out to be someone else, or, someone else from the future, that's a very Shakespearean thing.
Yeah.
Thing to happen, yeah.
Yeah, obviously. It's great. I thought of that too. Disguise is a big part. Bernard not being who he is. A lot of people. Yeah.
Also, the idea that you can create someone who looks like anything is...
Yeah.
It's almost ancient Greek mythish. Like, you can shape someone out of... I think it's in Ovid... You can shape someone out of clay and then bring them to life.
Right.
Which happens in Westworld. Even in that beginning sequence, you see, like, the body, which is like the Da Vinci sort of like with the arms out, getting rolled through the thing,
Yeah.
So
it's very Frankenstein too.
Yes. It is for sure Frankenstein. I mean, Ford is such a Frankenstein figure.
the god figure.
But he does actually quote him at one point. He says he wants to acquire knowledge. Interesting, too, to our point about gods, because the subtitle of Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus. And I think you could say especially that Ford is the modern Prometheus to the extent that he actually, it sort of gives the hosts their fire, which is what Prometheus did. He gave humans fire.
Right.
And that's why he got cast out of heaven and chained to a rock for all eternity.
What do you think of Logan? Who is he in Shakespeare?
He's that one angry friend in Romeo and Juliet who talks about Queen Maeve. He's that one toxic masculinity friend in Romeo and Juliet, I think.
Tybalt?
No, Tybalt is the enemy of Romeo.
But he's also toxic masculinity.
Yes, but the friends of Romeo are also very toxic. And I think he is Mercutio, the sort of toxic masculinity, really angry friend, the one who brings up Queen Maeve and all the fairies and is sort of trying to get Romeo to go to the party where he ends up meeting Juliet because he's saying, you're thinking too much about Rosaline. You're thinking too much about my sister. You need to...
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. Okay, Logan, we found who you are.
Who do you think Logan is?
No, I was wondering if there was this betrayed friend in Shakespeare that we hadn't thought about, but I can't figure it out. But that's a good point.
Mercutio does sort of become a betrayed friend. His last line is a plague on both your houses, because he essentially says, I died for you,
right,
Romeo, and why?
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I couldn't figure out who Logan was. But if you think of somebody else, please write us an email, howtogetawaywithshakespeare@gmail.com. Oh, there's this quote from Hamlet, from Charlotte Hale. That is the Tessa Thompson character. She was in Thor Ragnarok. And interestingly,
Fun fact.
Thor Ragnarok, if you see that scene in episode 8 where Luke Hemsworth, Anthony Hopkins, and Tessa Thompson are all in the same room at the lab, they're all in Thor Ragnarok. So, fun fact about that.
And she plays another great woman character in that.
Yeah.
She's one of the Valkyries, right?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Maybe she got the role from Westworld, or it's the other way around. Or she just got the role by herself. And
she is a very good actress, and I can't wait to see what else she's in.
Yeah.
I'd like to see her in some Shakespeare, actually.
Anyway, so she throws this line from Shakespeare. Do you want to read it?
In a Shakespeare voice?
No, but you read better than I do.
Brevity is the soul of wit.
And that's from?
It's from Hamlet. It's actually Polonius who says that. I guess to Hamlet. I thought it was to Gertrude, but maybe not.
Okay, and what do you make of that line?
What do I make of it? Like, from which perspective?
Westworld context.
You know, the thing I have about that line is that Polonius, as a character, Polonius, when his son is about to go off to school again, Laertes is about to go off to school, he tells him a million of these sort of like phrases like that. Like he says, "To thine own self be true," but then he gives him sort of very contradictory advice. He gives him like 10 different little adages to sort of carry around.
Right.
And so you can't really trust anything that Polonius says, and that's why I get so frustrated when people say that, you know, these quotes are like, oh, inspiring quotes from Polonius. And I'm like, I don't think Shakespeare is really giving us advice through Polonius, the character.
So what about Charlotte Hale? What do you make of that link between Polonius and Laertes, and when she says it to Lee?
I think it's interesting when she says it to Lee, because then that leaves him as Laertes. And then we have to ask
yeah, that's interesting.
Hamlet is.
Yeah. Who Hamlet is? I don't know.
Okay, so.
But it might also just be, you know, when we analyze these quotes, yes, Lee could be Laertes, but that doesn't mean that Laertes, whatever it is.
No, I'm making a joke, because Lee.
Oh! Repeat that.
Laertes.
Oh, that's great. Laertes. Do you get that, dear listeners? Laertes? Okay.
I'm sure they get it.
I'm sure they do too. They're much smarter than us. Yeah, it's interesting, but it doesn't. Maybe there's a Hamlet that we're missing. Maybe it's Bernard, but it doesn't have to be. It might just be a moment from Shakespeare that Lisa Joy and Jonathan Nolan found interesting, and they put in their script.
And it's probably something that, I think that's something that writers often think about, like when they're trying to write lines for a show, because the more and more you build up like this dialogue and you're trying to make a joke come out, you might sort of think like to keep it concise might be better. And she does say a couple things to him like, show, don't tell. Isn't that what you writers like? So I think it's sort of throwing back one of those writerly things at him. And of course, Shakespeare, as a writer, is writing a thing about being funny in your language, which is interesting.
So if Lee is Laertes, how is he a Laertes? That's interesting.
I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. That's interesting. Think about. How is he a Laertes?
Or, I mean, he could be Gertrude. Because, you know, he's sort of there, like, sort of going along with it, but, like, not that involved. But he's coming up with his storylines. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's just sort of acting on everyone's bidding, you know?
Well, we don't have an answer right now, but we'll think about it. And if we do, we'll have an answer next week. Or write us and tell us.
Just be brief, because brevity is the soul of Twitter interactions.
Of wit.
Twitter interactions.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. We should talk about the Ford moment at the end. So, earlier we were talking about Ford as being a Prospero figure.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Ford ordered Dolores to kill him. It's not clear. Maybe we'll know in season 2. But if he did, it's very Prospero-like moment. Because he says, before he's about to get killed, Ford says, "I'm sad to say this will be my final story. An old friend once told me something that gave me great comfort. My final story, like Prospero, before he breaks his staff."
Right.
It's his final story that he makes because he is responsible for the marriage of Ferdinand and Miranda. So it's his final story, and he doesn't want a power anymore.
And as sort of a double layer there, a lot of people for a long time thought that The Tempest was also Shakespeare's last play. So they thought it was sort of Shakespeare saying at the end, this is my last story. The only power I have left is...
And Shakespeare as the creator.
Exactly.
Prospero as the creator. Ford as the creator.
Exactly, yeah.
That's really cool. It's also a reminder of Game of Thrones. Ford and Sean Bean just being the movie stars that they are and being executed at the end. That was funny. That's not Shakespearean, but it's the kind of same that Anthony Hopkins does. He's there for one season, and then he gets executed at the end, like Sean Bean gets executed in Game of Thrones, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he gets set free, like Prospero. Well, Prospero says essentially, indulge me and set me free.
Yeah.
With applause rather than killing me.
It's clearly not the same moment in Game of Thrones, but yeah.
It's a little bit of being set free.
Yeah. We'll discuss that when we talk about Game of Thrones.
Yes.
But yeah, just a reminder of that. And Prospero says, we got our friend Shakespeare here that's going to say that monologue for us. Shakespeare, are you there?
"Now my spells are all broken, and the only power I have is my own, which is very weak. Now you all have got the power to keep me prisoner here, or send me off to Naples. Please don't keep me here on this desert island with your magic spells. The gentle wind you blow with your applause will fill my ship's sails. Without applause, my plan to please you has failed. Now I have no spirits to enslave, no magic to cast spells, and I'll end up in despair unless I'm relieved by prayer, which wins over God himself and absolves all sins. Just as you'd like me to have your sins forgiven, indulge me, forgive me, and set me free."
Okay, great quote, Cheerio. So that line is it's Prospero, but it's very Ford-like to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Prospero saying, "Oh, goodbye," and Ford saying goodbye too. And Prospero breaks his staff, and then he says that monologue, and Ford is relieved of his contract, or relieved of his magic, like Prospero is.
Right.
And
because he sort of led them to the maze, right?
And then bye-bye for Ford, and then bye-bye to staff for Prospero.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah. It's funny.
I guess the thing would be, though, that Prospero is traveling back to the society he was born in, back to being part of royalty. Where's Ford headed?
Well, death is never the final destination in Westworld, as we know.
Interesting.
Because Bernard is Arnold, and Ford could come back in later seasons as Oast if he wasn't one in season 1.
We don't know about anyone, do we?
We don't know. We really don't. But Maeve seems to know. Maeve seems to know. She says, "Oh, you're one of them," to Felix at the end. She's like, "Oh no, you're not a host. You're one of them. I know." So she seems to know. So she might know if Anthony Hopkins was a host or not.
That would be very strange if he was, though, because it would just add another layer of he knows that Bernard knows that or that Bernard doesn't know. It's like that level of the multiple layers of consciousness, sort of like knowing that other people are androids, but that you're not, but knowing how to control other androids. So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Stop all motor functions.
I was just thinking, Midsummer Night's Dream and the dream aspect coming from the host. So is there something there? The dreams, as it seems like in Westworld, in their dreams they're finding out stuff, or through their dreams they're resolving conflicts, or like in Midsummer Night's Dream, because when they enter the forest in Midsummer Night's Dream, it's like a dream.
Right.
And
it's sort of,
that's where they find out stuff.
And the dream is sort of the place of reconciliation in Shakespeare, especially in Midsummer Night's Dream. But it can also be a place of foreshadowing, like in Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
When Juliet has sort of the vision type of dream about Romeo eventually dying. And that's sort of working backwards in Westworld, because everyone, especially Dolores and Maeve, are having these dreams that they think are just dreams and then find out are actually their past, but they think it's the present that they're looking at.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, Midsummer Night's Dream. But there are no fairies. I don't think so.
Except for Maeve.
Yeah. Fairies are also like gods, though.
It's true. They have...
And they control the dreams, I guess.
Control.
Fascinating.
Fascinating.
What do you think, Shakespeare? Cheerio.
What do you think about... let me ask you, do you see like any other Shakespeare plays, like Pericles, maybe?
Yeah, we talked about Marina in the first bit, but yeah, Maeve is definitely a Marina because she's also a prostitute Marina in there, and she uses rhetorical speech. She uses rhetorical speech to defend herself against men, which is what Maeve does. Even though she's paid to sleep with men, she that doesn't stop her from being independent and being like, she at one point in Westworld she's like, oh, do you have a small she looks at the man's pants and she's like, oh, I guess you have a small whatever, and then she's like, do it quickly, I don't, and then kill me. And she's like, I don't care if I'm a prostitute or not, you won't decide for me, you won't control me, I'll still have the upper hand. And I think that's very Marina like. She, even though she is paid to sleep with people, she still has that speech ability, and that's agency in her case.
You know, the other interesting thing about her as Marina is that isn't Marina, you know, when she's left with the different family in, is it Thrasis? They eventually try to get her killed, and I'm thinking of them almost as the two lab technicians, Sylvester and Lutz.
Felix.
Yeah,
Lutz.
Felix Lutz.
Yeah.
Who are great side characters, by the way. I definitely want like a
and the cast is so diverse.
I want a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead spin-off with those two.
Yeah. They're
fascinating. But what I was saying is that, you know, Sylvester sort of tries to get her killed, and it's only because Lutz sort of lets her know. But it is sort of that similar thing where she gets the upper hand on them.
Yeah. That's great. Ba-boom.
Boom.
Yeah. There's also the relationship between Arnold and Ford. It reminded me of a relationship, the relationship between Polixenes and Leontes in The Winter's Tale. At some point, Polixenes tells Hermione, Leontes' wife, that Leontes and him were like twin lambs when they were growing up. And it reminded me of Ford and Arnold and the way that Ford talks about Arnold. Well, we were so close, and then we grew so much apart that Arnold had different ambition than me. It's not the same, but it reminded me of that relationship because Leontes and Polixenes are also torn apart because of something happening between them, a conflict. Leontes thinks that Polixenes is sleeping with his wife, and Polixenes says no. But it's also it reminded me of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. The conflict
Dynamic,
between
yeah.
the two who were best friends. Yeah, that for sure. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on between Arnold and Ford. Like, you wonder what kind of relationship they had. I mean, you can tell they were close, but like Arnold created Ford's family for him. You know, like, that's such a meaningful gift.
Yeah. There's also in The Winter's Tale, art becomes life.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something in Westworld? Because there are lots of arts. Ford talks about Michelangelo all the time. He talks about the human brain on the painting. And yeah, so does art turn into life in Westworld?
Absolutely. I mean, there's the scene where Dolores is painting on the train, and then she says, you know, it's where the ocean meets the mountains, and then they go off to the cliff, and she's like, here it is. So she essentially had been there before, and she sort of remembered it, and she paints it, but then it's actually there. But then also, I mean, to a greater degree, they're all art become life on a literal level. They're all, you know, like modeled out of this material and then like created by the 3D printing stuff, and you know, they can be dissolved as easily as they were made.
To remind our listeners, in The Winter's Tale, when I say art becomes life, it's Hermione's statue, and then Paulina does a spell on the statue, and Hermione comes back to life. So art turns back to life, turns into life. So that's interesting if we think of Westworld.
But we might think of Oscar Wilde. You know, does art echo life, or does life echo art?
Yeah. And it's very, actually it reminded me of the play that we read last year in class. The Balcony?
The Balcony by Genet.
Westworld and The Balcony are very similar.
And The Balcony is all about performance, but it takes place in a brothel, of course, so it's very similar to Maeve's storyline.
It's also about performance, Westworld.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
It's also the same. The guests are performing. As
and they're
much
performing,
as
the same
as the
roles.
host.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that's not Shakespeare, but it's still.
It's literary.
If we think of literary difference, not difference, but there.
And Genet's point is that we are all performing different roles all the time, which of course is something that on a literal level, you know, we see Maeve as this mother role. And then we see her switch to a different role, and then they plan on moving her to a different role later on.
That's very Shakespeare too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what are we if we're not all players on the world stage?
Yeah. If we think of Lear, Lear has different roles. He has the role of the king in the beginning, the cold king, and then when he's exiled, he's not the king anymore. He becomes only the father.
And he becomes sort of a fool figure also, I mean, on the heath.
Yeah, so we have different roles. So that's very Shakespearean thing. It's not just Genet. That Genet didn't invent that, but it's part of his play. But yeah, that's very Shakespearean too. So you should read The Balcony, by the way, because it's very Westworldy. Yeah.
The Balcony is a really interesting play. I'd really like to see a performance of it. I feel like it's one of those where if you're not really watching it, you know, you're missing something.
Actually, fun story about that. When I went to Dawson College in Montreal, I was in a theater group called Showtime. And Showtime was theater, but it was also an English class. And we were like 20 in that English class. And we could take it for an English credit, but we were doing a play in that class.
Right.
And the semester before I arrived, they performed The Balcony.
Oh, but you didn't get to be in it.
No, so I'm very interested in it. I want to see it so much. Yeah.
I mean, I love that kind of thing where you bring together performance and the literary analysis of the text. Like one of our professors, Professor Gobert, actually, he taught us about
Darren Gobert, yeah.
Yes, Darren Gobert. He actually does lectures usually every year at the Stratford in Ontario in Canada. And he lectures about something in some kind of play, even if it's not Shakespeare. But then all the actors listen to it. So it's, you know, sort of that workshop idea.
So yeah, It's very Westworld is very. It's not just Shakespeare. It takes from all over the place. It takes from Sherlock Holmes. It takes from.
Deep and Dreamless.
It takes from Dante. It takes from Shakespeare.
Frankenstein.
What else?
The other thing I've been thinking of that I'm not sure where this would go, but I feel like Dolores is such an odd name for like a girl from Sweetwater, like this prairie sort of town in the Wild West. I mean, dolor in Spanish is literally the word for pain. It's a common name in some areas, but I don't know. I feel like it's a very strange name for the daughter of Peter Abernathy,
Yeah.
So, I'm watching that one.
She's not the daughter of Peter Abernathy.
Well, I mean, in that role she is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also talking about roles too, because the hosts are not always in the same roles. Dolores' father is not the same man when Peter Abernathy is gone. They just switch him for another host, and he becomes the Peter Abernathy of the.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting too how there's one point where someone tries to take Dolores home before they realize that she's with William, and they say a rancher's daughter went missing, and she's like, no, I'm not part of that story anymore. But it's interesting that they call her a rancher's daughter. Like, I'm pretty sure she's over 18 at least.
Right.
So it's very interesting that she's classified that way. She's not her own self. It's not, I don't know, a beautiful girl from Sweetwater. It's the rancher's daughter.
Interesting. And she lives in quite the pastoral landscape too.
Absolutely. And her speech about, what a beautiful world is very pastoral. And she paints those, the paintings she does are like classic pastoral paintings where it's,
What is classic, Jane?
Classic pastoral paintings where it's like a little bit of water, the greenery. There could be a domestic creature like a sheep, like the wild horses that are very tame and people can go up and feed them. But there's never like, a bear or anything. You wouldn't see that. She does like those very nice little paintings.
By the way, our listeners are going to find out that you have an obsession for water. You talked about it for The Shape of Water. You talked about it for Bloodline. And you talked about it for this.
Oh, I could talk about water imagery in anything. It's always there. There's water imagery in Macbeth. You want to hear about that?
No, let's talk about dismemberment.
Really? When can we talk about dismemberment?
Now, in the last episode, there's dismemberment.
I feel like there's dismemberment in every episode.
The snake girl. A technician goes to the snake girl, rebuilding her body.
Armistice, yeah.
And he thinks she's asleep. He puts a finger in her mouth, and she wakes up, and she has the finger between her teeth. So, and then she bites, so dismemberment there, and then she loses her arm as she fight. So there's a lot of dismemberment there if you want to look at that.
Really relates very strongly to some of the themes behind the show, because dismemberment often refers to fragmentation of the self and questions, are you your whole self without your body? Which I think is something really interesting in regards to the hosts, Are they part of their body? Are they engineered to be who they are? Is there a consciousness that you could take out of them and put somewhere else? Are they conscious? But also, would a person be the same person if they lost half of their brain? That kind of thing. And dismemberment, there's a lot of, even with Maeve, she has that wound in her side. Dismemberment can also be, it doesn't have to be an actual like removal of a limb to be important.
Right.
Like there's that idea of your body disintegrating that was terrifying in Shakespeare's time. Because it's, letting disease in essentially. And it's the idea of your body falling apart that's terrible. But that doesn't happen to the host because you can take them apart, but then they get repaired. You can replace parts.
There is so much Shakespeare in this. So much.
We could do an 8-hour podcast on just this.
I can't wait for season 2 and what Shakespeare bring us in season 2. Is William Shakespeare gonna appear? I feel like we're just waiting for that. Oh, I'm here. A host. That is William Shakespeare. Yes. By the way, Westworld Season 2, in the 10th episode, there are samurais that we see. So Westworld Season 2, they talked about samurais.
I feel like we're going to see Cymbeline in that then.
Mm-hmm.
Because Cymbeline is one of those, there actually could be Cymbeline connections with this, because Cymbeline is sort of set like in a weird time and place, and there's like that.
And Yakimo too, trying to own Imogen's body.
Absolutely.
When he goes into the bedroom.
Exactly, and he takes that proof, like the bracelet or the ring or whatever it is.
Just like William, aka the Black Guy, tries to own Dolores in the first episode. And
he seems like he does. He says that creepy thing like, you don't remember me and I've been coming here for 50 years.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you. I get that same feeling from him that I get from Yakimo. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of the Yakimo in that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Dolores, is a sort of very Imogen figure.
Mm-hmm. And she rebels.
She's very virtuous, but, she stands up for herself. She runs away, which Imogen does.
Yeah.
I feel like if she woke up next to her husband's corpse with his head cut off, well, she thought it was her husband's corpse, she'd give him a hug. She'd cover herself in his blood. She's loyal like that.
Mm-hmm. And she reacts when Logan kills all these people, and she it feels like she wants to give them hugs too.
I know.
Yeah. But then William turns. She's afraid of him now. Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so that's it for this week for us. I think we covered pretty much all we wanted to cover.
Mm-hmm. But if we missed anything, send us an email. It's howtogetawaywithshakespeare@gmail.com, or send us a tweet. It's
at Vega Gabe.
You could say at Vega Gabe or at Jane the Fox, or you can message us at our new Twitter handle, which is the first letters of the podcast. So HTGAWS_podcast, or just search How to Get Away with Shakespeare and you'll find us. You don't have to type in all that.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you for listening again. If you're still with us. I say that every week, but we're very grateful if you're still with us.
And thank you for listening to
we love our
episodes.
listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I got this week, some people told my mom, oh, we're listening to Gabe's podcast, and we love it. So please, write us an email if you like it. I want to know who listens to it, actually. Because I think nobody listens to this podcast. And then if I find out that people actually listen. So it's great.
It's fun, yeah. Hi, Mom.
Also, thank you to Audible for sponsoring this podcast. We are really grateful again.
Thank you, Audible, and for being the highlight of my life.
So, we're going to finish with a quote from The Tempest.
Yes, we will.
Jane, please read it.
Not a soul but felt a fever of the mad and played some tricks of desperation. All but mariners plunged in the foaming brine and quit the vessel. Then all afire with me, the king's son Ferdinand with hair up staring. Then like reeds, not hair, was the first man that leapt, cried, "Hell is empty, and all the devils are here."
And you know the significance because we explained it before.
Yes, but I think it's too good a quote not to read at the end. It's such a great line. Hell is empty and all the devils are here.
Bye-bye.
If you liked this podcast and want more, go on iTunes and search for How to Get Away with Shakespeare. We're also on SoundCloud, Spreaker.com, and YouTube. Again, thank you very much for listening.